For 7 days, I left behind everything familiar and stepped into the forest to live as an ancient Slavic pagan might have lived. No electricity, no phone, no modern comfort, just the land, the elements, and the mindset of a person who sees nature not as a resource, but as something alive, sacred, and deeply connected to human existence. Before I began, I spent time learning about early Slavic pagan traditions. These were people who lived closely with nature, believing that forests, rivers, fire, and even the wind had spirits. Whether those beliefs are taken literally or symbolically, they create a completely different way of interacting with the world. You don't just take, you ask, observe, and respect. So I decided that this wouldn't just be a survival challenge, it would be an attempt to shift perspective, to slow down, to listen. When I entered the forest, the first thing I noticed was how quickly the outside world disappeared. The sounds of roads and people faded within minutes. In their place came something quieter but more complex, the layered sound of wind through trees, distant birds, branches moving, leaves shifting underfoot. I chose a place near a small stream, not too deep into the forest but far enough to feel isolated. Water was essential, and in older traditions, rivers and streams were often seen as sacred boundaries, places of transition. It felt appropriate to begin there. The first day was entirely practical. I needed shelter. Using fallen branches, I began constructing a simple lean-to. It was slow work. Every piece had to fit in a way that would hold through wind and possibly rain. I layered branches, covered them with leaves and moss, trying to insulate against the cold ground and the night air. By evening, I had something usable, though far from perfect. But perfection wasn't the goal. Function was. Before the sun disappeared, I gathered wood and prepared a place for fire. Fire, in Slavic pagan belief, wasn't just a tool. It was something respected, even honored. It gave warmth, protection, and the ability to cook. Sitting in front of it later that night, I understood why it held such importance. Darkness in the forest is complete. There are no streetlights, no distant glow from buildings, only firelight, and beyond it, shadows. That first night, every sound felt amplified. A branch snapping in the distance could mean anything, or nothing. The mind fills in the gaps quickly. I didn't sleep much. The second day began with cold air and the realization that everything requires effort here. Even basic things like water and food are not automatic. I collected water from the stream and boiled it over the fire. Then I began searching for edible plants. I had studied beforehand, but in reality, identifying safe food is much harder than it seems. I found berries, some edible greens, but nothing abundant. Hunger wasn't extreme, but it was present. I also tried to think about how ancient people would approach this, not just taking what they needed, but being aware of limits. Over-harvesting in one place could mean problems later. Even in a short-term experience, I tried to follow that mindset. Throughout the day, I became more aware of the forest's rhythm. It wasn't random. Certain sounds repeated at certain times. Light moved in predictable ways. The forest had its own structure. On the third day, something shifted. The initial discomfort started to fade, and a routine began to form. Wake up with the light, check the fire, gather wood, look for food, improve shelter, rest when needed. But beyond the routine, there was a change in how I perceived time. Without a clock or schedule, the day felt longer, but also more natural. I wasn't rushing between tasks. I was responding to what was needed in the moment. I also began incorporating small rituals, not in a strict or historical sense, but as a way to connect with the experience. Before taking water or gathering food, I paused. Not out of superstition, but out of awareness. It changed how I acted. By the fourth day, the forest tested me. Rain began early and didn't stop. Everything became wet. The ground, the wood, the air itself. Fire became difficult to maintain. My shelter, which had seemed sufficient, showed its weaknesses. Water seeped in. The cold increased. This was the hardest part of the experience. Not dramatic danger, but slow discomfort, the kind that wears you down. I focused on small things, keeping the fire alive, staying as dry as possible, conserving energy. It wasn't about progress. It was about endurance. At some point, I understood something important. Ancient life in the forest wasn't constantly dramatic or adventurous. Much of it was exactly this: managing discomfort, adapting to conditions, and continuing despite difficulty. When the rain finally stopped on the 5th day, the change was immediate. Sunlight returned, reflecting off wet leaves. The air felt clearer. The forest seemed almost renewed. This was the first day I felt truly adapted. Tasks that had seemed difficult at the beginning were now more manageable. I moved more efficiently, made better decisions, and understood my environment more clearly. I improved my shelter again, reinforcing weak areas and adjusting the structure based on what I had learned during the rain. I also organized my space better. Wood in one place, tools in another. There was a sense of control, or at least cooperation with the environment. The 6th day was quieter. I spent less time actively working and more time observing. Watching how animals moved through the forest, listening to patterns in sound, noticing how light shifted throughout the day. In many ancient traditions, observation was a form of knowledge. You didn't impose on the environment, you learned from it. I began to understand how much information is available if you pay attention, not in a mystical sense, but in a practical one. The forest communicates constantly. You just have to notice. There was also a mental shift. Without constant input, no phone, no conversation, no external noise, my thoughts slowed down. They became clearer, less fragmented. Time felt less pressured. By the 7th day, I knew it was coming to an end. There was a strange balance of emotions. Part of me was ready to return, to warmth, comfort, ease. But another part wanted to stay longer, to see how much deeper this adaptation could go. That final day, I didn't try to do anything new. Instead, I repeated what I had learned. Gathered wood, maintained the fire, collected water. Simple actions, but now familiar. Sitting by the fire that evening, I thought about what this experience actually meant. It wasn't an accurate recreation of ancient life. 7 days isn't enough for that. And I still had knowledge, preparation, and the safety of knowing I could leave. But it was enough to change perspective. Living even briefly in this way reveals how different modern life is. Not better or worse, just different. In the forest, everything is direct. Effort leads to result. Mistakes have consequences. Success is simple and immediate. There is also a stronger sense of connection, not necessarily spiritual in a defined way, but experiential. You are part of the environment, not separate from it. The next morning, I left. Walking back toward the edge of the forest, the sounds of the outside world gradually returned. Distant vehicles, human activity, structure. It felt faster, louder, more controlled. But I carried something with me. A deeper respect for the knowledge of those who lived this way. Not just survival skills, but awareness, patience, and adaptability. And a question. What would happen if more of us spent even a short time like this, away from constant distraction, closer to the natural rhythms we often ignore? Maybe we wouldn't become ancient Slavs, but we might understand a little more about what it means to live with less, notice more, and move through the world with a different kind of attention. 7 days wasn't enough to master anything, but it was enough to begin understanding.